Welcome everyone to this tutorial on GhostToolPro's 2D features. In the latest update we introduced a lot of new stuff, and in this tutorial we will focus on how to implement the Ghost tool for 2D objects. Okay, so let's get started. Let's create a new scene and set up a basic level so we have something to play around with. I will do this really quickly because it has nothing to do with the asset itself and you will probably implement this on your own level. To do so, we will firstly import standard assets, but you need to have some basic graphics to work with. We will only need the 2D part though. Okay, so let's add some ground, a little gap and a ramp. Let's also add a kill zone to restart the level if we fall down. Unity provides us with a prefab to restart the level, but we'll write our own as the tutorial progresses. I also added the main character, which I took out of the standard assets too. Next we will parent him to the camera so it will follow him while we run. That's it already. As you can see, we have a little level now where we can jump around and run and die by falling off. So let's get started with the actual tutorial. First of all, navigate to the prefab folder that comes with GhostToolPro. Here you find two free prefabs, one for 3D and one for 2D. Drag the ghost monitor 2D into the scene. This is the object that will handle all the ghosting for us, and we will only need to tell it when to start or stop the monitoring or the replay. As you can see, these come already pre-tagged, so this will allow us to find them later on. Let's create our first script and call it starter2d, whatever. Okay, so we will need a reference to the ghost monitor 2D that we just dragged into our scene. To do this, we will simply search for game object that is tagged with ghost monitor 2D and grab the ghost monitor 2D component. I showed you before that these objects come pre-tagged, so all the work is already done. You can of course implement your preferred way of getting a reference to the object, like a public field where you can simply drag and drop the object to it. But we will go this way for the tutorial. So now that we have access to our monitor, we will need to provide the tracked game objects as well as all the sprites that it uses for its animations. To do so, we create public fields for the sprites and the tracked objects and simply drag them in the editor. The ghost monitor needs the sprites beforehand to allow perfectly smooth replay of the ghost without lag or loading times. Okay, so I'm just rearranging things here a bit. Sorry. Okay. Now let's go to the editor and drag in the sprites and the game object. To do so, we need to attach our script to some object. It can be the camera or whatever. We will just take the ghost monitor for this tutorial. Okay, so let's add our script to the game object. Let's navigate to our sprites. In the case of the standard assets, most animations are on sprite sheets. They are grouped under the main sprite. If that's not the case for you and you have a simple sprite for every frame, that's fine too. select them all and drop them on the fields we just created. Okay, next step is to add the tracked object onto our script. In this case it is only one, but if you got multiple objects that's fine too. Simply drag them all onto our script. What is important here is that all the objects you track together will be grouped into one replay. So if you want to start and stop them, they will all start and stop together. If you want them to behave independently, you will need to create multiple instances of the ghost monitor and use each one for the separate replay. So let's change start to awake here, because the monitor needs to know what sprites can appear before the start. We will need to pass the sprites to a public field called sprite collection. So simply do this like so. We don't need an update, so let's remove that too. To start, we will control the start and stop by a button. We implement the functionality in the onGUI method. If you follow the coding, make sure that you capitalize GUI in order for it to work. Okay, let's add a button that when pressed either starts a recording, or if one is already happening, stops it and replays the ghost. Simply implement some random button that appears anywhere on the screen. Then give it some text. Okay, so if this button is pressed, we call the isMonitoring method on the myGhostMonitor. This method returns true if the monitoring is already running, and false if not. Make sure to add parentheses because it's a method. It is important to note that a single ghost monitor can only run one monitoring at a time. So if you need to start several runs at different times, you need to implement separate ghost monitors for each of them. Okay, so if a monitoring was started before, let's stop it. The name that you pass here as argument is the name by which you can start the ghost later on, like we're doing now. We are starting the replay that we called current run. Make sure to remember or to note the name of the stopped monitoring somewhere, because you have to call it with the name. Okay, let's pass false, because we do not want to interpolate the replay. For more detail on this, check the documentation. Okay. We also could have implemented this by calling a simple method called stop monitoring and play and passing a name. This is the same as we did before with the two separate methods, so if you want to start it immediately, you could simply call this method. Okay, if we are not monitoring, we will do so by simply calling start monitoring. And we will pass the tracked objects to this method. Let's add one more thing to this before we start testing it out. We will stop the replaying before we start a new one, simply to get rid of some prior ghosts. Okay, let's try it out. So we click the button, run around and jump, whatever, go to the gap to really see that it works well. Okay. Now the ghost monitor is currently tracking all the animations and the movements that are happening. And if you press the button again, we will see it. There's our ghost. These are the exact same movements that we did before. The low frame rate comes from the screen capturing. This ghost is actually has exactly the same frames than your game is running at. Okay. So next, let's take this a step further. Currently, if you restart the game, the ghost is gone. In some cases this may be okay and sufficient, but if you want to save the ghost or only keep the best run, on GhostToolPro you can do this very easily. Let's remove what we coded before and get started. What we will do now is, right when the game is started, we check if the ghost monitor is monitoring or not, and then start a capture. We do this the same way as we did before. Then we create a new script that will handle the dying phase. In our case, when the player falls off the cliff. It will stop the monitoring and save it. So let's do this now. Go to our folders and create a new script. We will simply call it restarter2d to keep the convention we started before. Okay, so let's open it up. We need reference to our ghost monitor again, the same as we did before. We also need a string called labPath where we will store the file name under which the ghost will save the replay. You need to keep track of this in order to be able to replay the ghost after restarting. But more on this later when we actually need the variable. Let's simply get it done for now. Okay, so do this the same way as before, or however you like to do it. We will just go with the tag and search for it and grab the component. We don't need an update again, but we will need an onTrigger entity. In this we will check if our player falls down and collides with our dead zone. To do so, we will first of all check if it's really our player that collided, and if so, we will stop the game and the replays that are running. As you can see, oops, I got it locked. As you can see, the player is already tagged, so we can use that here. So we'll set the time scale to 0 to stop the game. Then we will stop the replays if there are any running. If not, then nothing happens. The next step is to check if we are monitoring something, and if yes, we will stop it. This is the same as we did before. And again, here you need to pass the name under which you stop the replay. Then next, what's new here is we will also call save monitoring and pass the name under which we stopped it before. So in this case, current lab. Again here, be aware that calling save monitor will override any previously saved replays under the same name. This is fine for our case as we only want one replay, but if you want to show more, then you need to change the name to however you like it. Next, GhostToolPro comes with a couple of events that you can listen to. One of them is onFileSaved. It is called when the saving is done, which is mostly very fast, but still you need to really wait for it to be called before, let's say, stopping a game or reloading a scene, because otherwise the replay cannot be saved. Visual Studio implements this method to listen for this event automatically. As you can see, it receives a string, and this is actually the path under which the ghost is saved. So we will then store this path in our variable that we created before called labPath. and later on we will save it in our player paths. Sorry. Okay. Then we will implement a coroutine that waits until the saving is done. This is simply done by checking if our lab path variable is still empty, and if so, we will simply return a null. Yeah, very easy. So if it's no longer empty, then we will set our player prefs to store the path. You can store this however you like. I'm going for player prefs here because it's simple, easy and fast. We will store our lab path in the player prefs under lab and then reload the scene. So now that our coroutine is done, we go back to our onTrigger enter, and we simply have to start the coroutine by calling start coroutine and the name. Now, if we were previously not monitoring, we will simply reload the scene. So the next thing we need to do is initialize the lab path and set it to empty. And also we need to reset the timescale to run because we stopped it earlier and set it to 0. So if the game is reloading, we will simply set it to 1 if it was 0 previously. Otherwise the game will not do anything. It will simply stop. Okay, so the very last thing we need to do now is load the actual replay from the file and start it. GhostToolPro really handles this all for you and is very easy to do so. All you need to do is call start replay, and we will only do this if we previously set our player prefs. So we make sure that we have a replay, and if we have one, then we will load it. All you need to do is call start replay and pass the name or the file, pass the file path. That's the one we stored in our player prefs. That's it, simple as that. Okay, so let's try it out. Go back to Unity and run the game. So oh yeah, I forgot. We need to add our restarter script, our own one, to the kill zone. Next, let's start it. Jump around and run around some. And now, when we fall down, the scene gets reloaded, and you can see there's our ghost from the previous one. It does exactly what we did before. And if we die again, we have a new ghost, and so on and so on. That's it. Now you successfully implemented GhostToolPro for 2D models. If you're interested in how to implement it for 3D models or skinned meshes, simply check out our other tutorials. One more thing, as you can see now, if you restart our game, there we go, the ghost is still there. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments, like to say thank you, whatever, feel free to add a comment under this video. Thank you, and until next time.